Howdy, Brian S. Pratt here. I'm going to read chapter 14 of Fires of Prophecy, book 2 in the Morcyth Saga. They have reached Khorasan. For those who know, for those who read the series before, you know, Khorasan, things kind of get exciting here. And Khorasan is a big slave marketing hub of the Empire. The people who were captured in the fall of the City of Light have been brought down to take them out, or to sell them, rather. Not take them out, they won't sell them, to sell them. They just want to make money. Alright. Now here's a thought. Now I'll wait till the end, if I remember. Chapter 14. As they approached Khorasan from the north, a large complex of buildings came into view over on the eastern edge of town, containing many pens full of slaves. That must be where we'll find them, James observed. Let's go, Jerome urged. We need to get the caravan settled in first, James insisted. Then we can scout for Tersa and Miko. Seeing that Jerome was going to be stubborn, he continued, if we don't behave like an actual caravan, we might gain attention that could prove awkward. Seeing conflicting emotions flash across Jerome's face, he waited. After only a moment's deliberation, the knifer nodded and said, okay, well, let's do it fast. Agreed. During their approach, they noticed a large caravanserai off to the north of town, closer to the lake. When they left the road and headed for it, Hakir and Hakim took their leave, continuing toward town to deliver their goods. As you recall, Hakir and Hakim were two lads that Delia had contracted with somebody to escort to Khorasan to deliver goods. They got 10 golds from it, so they're gone. At the caravanserai, they found a suitable location and quickly settled in. After the horses and wagon had been taken care of, Jerome looked to James and urged, let's go. James turned to Tanakh, stay here and take care of things. Tanakh's face fell as he realized he was being left behind. Just before he was able to protest, he heard Cassie call, Tanakh, can you help me, please? Torn between conflicting desires, he finally said to James, all right, as he went to see what Cassie needed. By this time, Jerome had changed into native garb, having chosen one that partially covered his face. If there were people from the City of Light in the pens who could recognize him, they wouldn't inadvertently give him away. Taking Roland with them to act as translator, they made their way to the main gate leading into Khorasan. There, as nowhere else, the ratio of slaves to citizens were staggering. Wherever he looked, James found slaves engaged in almost every facet of work. Hardly anyone walked down the street without at least one slave, of one kind or another, trailing along behind. Many carried packages and other items. Most, though, were simply following behind their owners. James was totally disgusted and almost intervened when they came across a man beating a young female slave for some slight infraction. Jerome took hold of his arm, which caused him to stop. Not now, Jerome cautioned, when James turned to him. We have people, our people, depending on us. Coming to his senses, James realized he was about to jeopardize the whole mission. Sorry. We understand, Roland assured him, but it's too ingrained, too well established to do anything about. As they resumed walking, James tried to shut out the crying, begging of the girl as she pleaded with her master to stop, that she would do better. Similar scenes played out over and over again as they continued toward the slave markets. All he could think of was to get Michael out of this as quickly as possible. When they reached the fence surrounding the slave pens, the guard at the entrance held up his hand and spoke. Roland made a reply as he slipped him a couple coppers. The guard took the coins and then nodded as he waved them on through. What did you tell him? Jerome asked once they were past the guard. I told him that we wished to view the slaves before the next auction, he explained. It's really quite common for a prospective buyer to do that. Usually you give some coins to the guard for the privilege. You seem to know a lot about slave market customs, Jerome accused. I took a trip down here a while back with an associate who was interested in purchasing some laborers, he replied. Once through the gates, they entered a large courtyard with two large platforms on either side that would be used during auctions. Off to one side, James noticed several posts sticking up from the ground, stained a dark red. It looked like blood. One appeared to have been recently used. Whipping posts, he shuddered. Another slave greeted them as they walked across the courtyard, and he exchanged words with Roland. Turning to the others, Roland said, I told him we wished to see the girls, that we were from a northern brothel and wished to purchase some at the next auction. When will that be? Jerome asked. Roland asked the man and then said, tomorrow. Jerome nodded in understanding. Thanks. The slaver led them to a set of pens holding females, and they walked slowly through them as if they were actually who they claimed to be. As Jerome searched for his sister, James looked closely at the faces of those in the pens. The hopelessness, the fear, and the degradation he saw there was almost more than he could bear. He felt a strong desire to let magic destroy the entire complex and free everyone within. Jerome looked anxiously at the girls within the pens and then turned to Roland and James, shaking his head. Roland exchanged a few words with the slaver before saying, there was another pen full of recent arrivals. He said that you would not be interested in those girls as they haven't yet learned their place and would be difficult at best to handle. Excited, Jerome said, that's where she will most likely be. Roland turned to the man and explained that they wished to see those girls as well, that many of their customers like to break them in. The slaver nodded in understanding and led them to another holding area. The noise level in this one was much greater than the last, as the majority of the girls either cried or talked amongst themselves. When they entered, the girls turned their attention toward them and it suddenly got very quiet. James could tell the difference between these girls and the previous ones. Some of these still had a defiant look about them that the previous ones lacked. Some even looked with contempt upon them as they passed by. Others were fearful. Well, yeah. Where others were fearful and sobbing. That's something there. Some even looked with contempt upon them as they passed by, where others were fearful and sobbing. Suddenly he heard a barely audible gasp escape Jerome. Glancing at him, he saw him nod his head. Man, I gotta get rid of all his heads. Indicating that he found her. Roland, that's her, he said quietly, indicating a young woman with long auburn hair. Are you sure? Roland asked. Jerome just stared at him like he's stupid or something. Okay, he replied. Then he turned to the slaver and pointed her out, saying they wanted a better look at her. The slaver motioned for two guards to come when they entered the pen. When the girls realized they were going to enter, many squealed and they all pressed as far away from the door as possible. When Tersa realized that they were coming for her, she tried to escape to the back of the pen, but the guards grabbed her. Scared and terrified, she tried to get free, but to no avail. They dragged her out of the pen and brought her to stand before them. The slaver asked Roland if this was the one they were interested in. With a nod from Jerome, Roland said that she was. As Roland made as if he was inspecting her, Jerome stared intently into her eyes. Suddenly, her breath caught as she realized who it was that stood before her. Yeah, that's it. You can always tell when I'm typing, the screen shakes. He barely shook his head, telling her to say nothing, and then gave her a wink. With a barely perceptible nod, she told him that she understood. Jerome indicated to Roland that he was ready to leave, and Roland told the slaver that they had seen enough. Once Tersa was put back in the pen, Roland asked if this batch would be auctioned at tomorrow's auction. Would be put up at tomorrow's auction. Shaking his head again. Actually, shaking his head there would work out, right? Yeah. Shaking his head, yeah. Guess I can't get overzealous in my removal of his head. Shaking his head, the slaver said that these won't be ready for auction for at least a week. When Roland relayed that to the others, Jerome exclaimed, "A week? We can't wait a week." James took out a gold piece and offered it to the slaver as he told Roland, "Ask him if there was any way he could expedite it for us." When Roland asked the slaver took the coin and nodded. He told Roland that the earliest was in 2 days, and when Roland started to protest, said that no matter how much they gave him, there was no way it could be done any quicker. He said 2 days, and that was the best he could do, Roland explained. Jerome looked back at his sister and said, 2 days then. The slaver led them to the courtyard. Jerome glanced back to her just before they left and saw her there, staring at him, her hands gripping the bars. Jerome hated leaving his sister in there, but didn't have any choice. "Can we see the young men now?" James asked, intent upon finding Miko. Roland asked the name of the slaver, who nodded and then altered his course as he took them over to the other side of the courtyard. He led them through a door and down a hallway which ran between several pens of young men and boys. 2 slaves were busy scrubbing bloodstains off the floor, and James asked, "What happened?" Roland asked the slaver, then translated the reply. He said last night several new arrivals had tried to escape, and 2 had been killed. James and Jerome glanced at each other, suddenly worried for his friend. Hoping to find him still within one of the pens, James walked down the hallway. His nervousness rose when he failed to see him within any of the pens. Chills ran through him as he feared the worst. While waiting on James, Jerome looked at the faces of the men and boys in the pens. His eyes widened in surprise as he recognized a couple of the fighters from the pits that he had fought with and against. One, a slim individual who was exceptionally deadly with sword and shield, leaned against the bars near the hallway. He walked down the hallway slowly toward him, acting as if he was inspecting them. Roland and the slaver remained back near the door. When he came close to the one by the bars, he whispered so only he could hear, "Don't move. Say nothing." The young man's eyes flicked at who spoke to him and widened when they recognized Jerome. He started to say something when Jerome shook his head and whispered, "Quiet, man." Sudden understanding came over him and he settled down. "How many are there?" Jerome asked in a voice barely audible. "There's 5 left that I know of," he replied softly. There were more, but a bunch made a break for it last night and 2 died. Yet the others got their backs flayed off them this morning as an example to the rest of us. Then in an urgent whisper, he said, "Jerome, get us out of here." "I'll see what I can do," he said, "but don't tell anyone, and I mean anyone, that I'm here. Understand?" With a slight nod, the young man agreed. Jerome turned and walked back toward where the others were and had Roland ask when those were scheduled to be auctioned. The slave replied, and Roland said, 3 days. James was getting frantic at not finding Miko, and Jerome worried he may do something rash. Roland asked if there were any more fresh arrivals, and the slaver replied no. Roland thanked the slavers and told him they were ready to go. Grabbing James's arm, he got him moving as they followed their guide out of the slavers' compound. Once outside and back on the streets of Khorasan, they headed back toward the caravan. James was quiet the entire way as he dealt internally with not finding Miko. Roland said to him, "You don't know he was one of those killed last night." "That's right," agreed Jerome. "There are many other reasons I could explain why he wasn't in the pens with the others." "Like what?" James asked. At a loss, Jerome just said, "I don't know, but you can't assume the worst until you know for sure." "I should raise this whole place to the ground," he threatened. "Do the world a favor." "But you won't," Jerome said. "You just aren't that way." "I can think it, though," growled James. When they arrived back at the caravan, Jerome explained what was happening to the others. Dealey asked, "Can't you do some magic thing to see if he's still alive?" As if the thought hadn't even occurred to him, James sat up and an idea formed in his mind. Excitedly, he said, "There may be. Or there may just be. There may just be." He hurried to the wagon and pulled out his shaving kit, removing the mirror. Sitting down, he looked into the mirror and concentrated on seeing Michael's face, his face as it was right then. Everyone gathered around and he heard them gasp as the image in the mirror began to blur and then refocus on a boy riding in the back of a wagon. "That's him!" James exclaimed excitedly. "He's alive!" In his excitement, he lost concentration and the reflection returned to normal. See, up until this point, he'd just been using his compass to find Michael. This is the first time he thought about using, creating an image in a mirror. See, in magic, he understood, at least mostly, about television, about how images come through the air and form on a screen. So he's using that science to enhance his magical ability. See, because magic has to know what they're doing. They can't just say put a picture of them on there. They have to have some kind of direction to get it going. And like once he starts doing this, other people will start doing it too, and I'm sure many do. But if you don't have a scientific background, magic is much harder, much more difficult. You can still do it, but it takes a lot more effort. That's why he is so good at magic. Read Wizard's Bane. Yeah, Wizard's Bane. That was a really good one. I got a lot of this from Wizard's Bane. In that one there, a computer programmer gets translocated to another world. I like those. I like those right. And he treats magic like computer programming. And so, of course, there you go. Wizard's Bane. Glenn Cook, I think, wrote it. I'm not entirely sure about that, but yeah, Glenn Cook. And the funny thing is that back on Earth he was called the Wiz. Behind him, he heard Delia say, "Now, all we have to do is find out who has him and where they are going." See, when I write, I originally make a sentence, right? And then I go back when I read it and edit it, and I change it. Sometimes words like found, I change the feeling of the wording, and it should go back to find. But the computer program doesn't recognize the fact that found is wrong, and so it doesn't key in there. And if I don't notice it, then it gets stuck there. That's why sometimes those words are wrong in there, because I originally type it one way, and then I have to read, and then I change all the words to make it sound better. Well, how I think it sound better. And then sometimes the words are left behind that shouldn't be. Maybe tomorrow we could ask around and find out, suggested Tenok. All right, James agreed. Just be careful and don't draw attention to yourself. That's right, said Jerome. We still have Tersa to save. He paused for a moment and then asked, "We may be in luck as well." "How do you mean?" asked James. "Well, it seems there are several," he pointed back toward the Saber compound, "who were fighters in the pits back in the city. If we were to buy them, we would have ready-made loyal guards." "Who?" "I talked briefly with Yorn," he explained, "and I saw Scar and Potbelly over in a different pen. Yorn said there were another 3 in there somewhere, but I didn't see them." "Can they be trusted?" James asked. "After what they've been through," Tanaka exclaimed, "you can be sure of it." "I agreed," added Jerome. "So," James began, "we have Tersa's auction in 2 days, and I believe they said that the guys were to be auctioned off in 3. He looked to Roland for confirmation, who nodded. "Since it's going to get late, we may as well remain here through the night and then see about discovering where Miko is headed first thing in the morning." James looked around and everyone seemed to be in agreement. "It will also give me time to drop off the packages that I have for Corazon," Dilly announced. When James looked to protest, she said, "It will give us more coins for the auctions and supplies." "All right, but don't go alone," James advised. "I won't, I promise." The next morning, Delia took Tanok and Roland with her, as well as a wagon to deliver her packages. After they left, James took the mirror out and found Miko still riding in the wagon. "He's heading south," he announced. "How do you know?" Cassie asked as she sat next to him in order to see the mirror. Pointing to Miko in the wagon, he explained, "See how the shadows fall? They're falling to the right of the wagon, so that means the sun is to their left, which in turn can only mean they are headed south." Right? Yeah. If you're heading south, north, on the left side is east. Sun rises in the east, that's in the west. "Oh," she said. Replacing the mirror back in his shaving kit, he took out his shaving knife and proceeded to remove what little stubble had appeared since the last time. While he shaved, Cassie remained next to him. "You like Tanok, don't you?" Blushing slightly, she said, Is it that noticeable?" "Well, you two are hardly seen apart." He was so nice and brave," she said. "I didn't care for him at first, but now that I've come to know him, I do. I think you two are very good together." Smiling, she said, "So do I." At just that moment, Archie began crying, so she got to her feet and hurried over to help Ezra. James smiled at her, retreating back as she walked to where they sat in the shade of the wagons. Finished with getting the stubble off, he replaced his knife and mirror back in the kit. He noticed Jerome pacing impatiently about the cap as he waited for the upcoming auction. When his pacing brought him near, James said, "Relax." "Can't," he replied as he paused a moment. Tomorrow won't get here any faster." "I know, but I can't just sit and do nothing, all the while knowing she's stuck in there." He resumed his pacing. Several hours later, Delia and crew came back with a wagon much emptier than had left. "How'd you do?" James asked. "You're not going to believe it," she exclaimed excitedly. "We received 200 golds for one package alone. Altogether, we collected 756 golds." Beaming, she patted a small chest resting on the floor of the wagon by her feet. "Impressive," he said as he helped her down. "Thank you. Well, they did take the packages from smugglers, and smugglers always have the best goods." Tanok said, "We were unable to find out anything about your friend, We didn't push too hard for information since we wanted to avoid drawing attention. I understand, James responded. He then went to Roland and asked, would you mind going to town with me? There's something I'd like to get. Sure, what? I want to find someone who can make a belt for me to hold my slugs, he explained. Right now, if you don't mind. All right. He said a few words to Ezra, and then with Jerome tagging along, they headed back into town. After inquiring with several locals, they made their way to a clothier who specialized in leather. The shop had a variety of goods on display made almost entirely of leather, belts, coats, hats, etc. Bent over a table, a man worked on stitching a belt together. When they entered, he looked up and said, one moment, please. Thankful that the man spoke his language, James said, not a problem. The man finished a few more stitches, then set the belt aside. Now, how can I help you? Hang on. Stepping to the table, James said, I am interested in a belt, one that can hold the slugs for my sling so I can have ready. I don't like that. I'm interested in a belt, one that can hold the slugs for my sling so I would have ready access to them. Yeah, I like that. Like what? I want pockets attached to the outside of the belt, just large enough to hold each slug firmly so it won't fall out as I move, James explained. There should also be a slit up the middle where I can grab it with my fingers to pull it out. The man took out a piece of parchment and made a rough sketch of what James envisioned. After a couple corrections, how about he produced one of the slugs. And then the clothier took it and asked. Okay. Stepping to the table, James said, I'm interested in a belt, one that can hold the slugs for my sling so I would have them ready to access. Still feels clunky. I'm interested in a belt, one that can hold the slugs for my sling, so they would be readily available. How about that? I'm interested in a belt, one that can hold the slugs for my sling, so they would be readily available. He produced one of the slugs. The clothier took it and asked, like what? I want pockets attached to the outside of the belt, just large enough to hold each slug firmly, so it won't fall out as I move. James explained. There should also be a slit up the middle where I can grab it with my finger to pull it out. The man took out a piece of parchment and made a rough sketch of what James envisioned. After a couple corrections, James was satisfied the man understood what he wanted. I could get something like this done for you, the man said, for about 5 silvers. I'll give you 6 if you can finish it by sundown tomorrow. Shaking his head, the man said, I have another order I must do first, but I can have it ready by the day after tomorrow for 6. Very well, James said as he handed over 3 silvers. I'll give you the rest when I pick it up. Taking the coins, the man said, very well, day after tomorrow. James shook his hand and they left the shop. They returned to their camp and spent a restless evening waiting for the morning and Tertius auction. The sun had no more crested the horizon before Jerome was itching to get going to the slave market for his sister. Relax, Roland said. The auction doesn't start until 2 hours after sunup. Still, Jerome said as he resumed his pacing. Once they had breakfast, Jerome, Roland, and James left for the auction. Jerome set a fast pace, and the coins in James's shirt that he had brought for the auction could be heard jingling with every step. At the gates to the slavers' compound, a line of people had already formed to enter. They waited for their turn and finally passed through to the courtyard beyond. One of the platforms on the edge of the courtyard had been set up for the auction. Pressing through the crowd, they maneuvered to get as close to the front as possible. James looked at all the people waiting for the opportunity to purchase a living human being, and it just made him disgusted. Several slavers stood on the platform, watching the crowd as the courtyard filled. Each had a whip hanging at their waist, Jerome waited impatiently for over 10 minutes before a door finally opened in the side of the courtyard and a line of girls emerged. Jerome looked at them anxiously, but didn't see Tirsa among them. The auctioneers... wait a second. No. Okay. Instead of Jerome waited patiently for 10 minutes. Now, because, 2 hours after sunset, they left right after sunset. I don't think they crossed into town. It took them 1 hour and 50 minutes to cross into town and enter and get there. So I changed it from 10 minutes to Jerome waited impatiently for what seemed a long time before a door finally opened in the side of the courtyard and a line of girls emerged. Jerome looked at them anxiously, but didn't see Tirsa among them. The auctioneer stepped to the front of the platform and called for the first girl to be brought forward. When she approached the front of the stage, one of the auctioneer's assistants removed her clothing. Standing naked, she sobbed as they turned her this way and that, showing her off to the crowd. Once the auctioneer had spoken to the crowd, the bidding began, and James saw those in the crowd raising their hands. When the bidding was done and the girl was being led to the man who bought her, Roland said, "She went for 75 gold. Was that a lot?" James asked. Stretching, Roland replied, "I don't know. I have never been here for this kind of auction." One by one, the girls were brought forward, displayed, and then sold. Once sold, each had a tether attached around their neck before being led from the platform to be received by their new owner. One girl collapsed in a faint and had to be carried away. The onlookers laughed while some called out to her new owner as he went to take charge of his property. The next line of girls emerged from the pens, and at the head of the line walked Tirsa. She did not look nearly as nervous as the rest. James saw her searching the faces of the crowd, trying to find her brother, but wasn't able to. When she was brought to stand next to the auctioneer and stripped, James thought Jerome was going to race up right there and fight everyone. But to his surprise, he took it stoically and endured this so he may have her back. The bidding commenced, and Roland raised his hand to make a bid. It had been decided he should be the one to bid on her since he understood the language. During the bidding, James watched Tirsa as her eyes moved from one bidder to the next in a hopeful attempt to locate her brother. He saw a slight uplifting at the corners of her mouth when her eyes stopped their roving and settled on where Jerome stood next to Roland. A slight smile escaped her, knowing her brother was out there. Roland continued bidding until all but a few were still with him. Then, from the back of the crowd, a loud voice said something and the crowd became positively silent. Looking back, James saw a large man, easily a head taller than anyone else in the courtyard. Bald head and extensively tattooed, with 2 swords strapped to his back, he strode to the front as the crowd quickly parted for him like the sea for Moses. All bidders remained silent as the man came forward, confident that she was hid. When Roland didn't say anything, Jerome said, "Bid!" "But," he stammered, having picked up a little of the language after having listened to the bidding. Jerome, having picked up a little of the language after having listened to the bidding, shouted out a bid in their language. The crowd collectively caught their breath, and the auctioneer paled. The giant of a man suddenly stopped and turned to see Jerome staring fiercely back at him. He cried something out, and again the crowd gasped. "What's going on?" James asked. "That's a Parvati," Roland explained, "the Empire's deadliest fighters. And they have a custom that the Empire supports for their service. They may call for a blood duel if anyone crosses them." James looked shocked by that. Why in God's name would they support a custom like that? "They serve the Empire loyally and fiercely," he explained. "That's why no one crosses them. Those that do, die." He looked at Jerome and said somewhat nervously, "He has called one on you for challenging his right to the slave." Jerome looked over at the Parvati and saw him staring back. The crowd widened into a wide circle. "So now," began James, "Jerome must fight him right here, right now." Looking to Jerome, Roland said, "You have no choice in the matter, and it is to the death." Jerome looked toward Tirsa, who stood on the platform, uncertain now that things were not going exactly as she had anticipated. He removed his excess native attire, and with a glance to the waiting Parvati, he pulled his knives and advanced. "Good luck," said James. "Thanks," Jerome said nonchalantly, "just like back at the pits." As he advanced, the Parvati drew his swords, one slightly shorter than the other. Not nearly as confident as he made out, Jerome sized up his opponent as he would in the pits. When he came within 6 feet of the Parvati, he stopped and waited for the attack. Knives were no good against an opponent who was prepared and waiting for your attack. You had to get them moving so an opening would present itself that could be exploited. Those who failed to learn that didn't last too long. Do I know anything about knife fighting? Not a thing. All this sounds logical to me. With a roar, the Parvati slashed with his long sword while keeping his shorter one back for defense. Jerome danced back and allowed the sword to pass mere inches away, never once taking his eyes from the Parvatis. The Parvati studied Jerome and then launched into a series of attacks using both the long and short sword. Jerome easily deflected each blow, avoiding much of the impact. He's good, but not the best I've seen, Jerome thought as his knives moved to counter each attack. The Parvati stopped his attacks and stepped back as he stared in disbelief at the little man with the two knives. The expression on his face said he didn't understand why Jerome remained standing. Again, the Parvati closed to attack and launched a complicated pattern, using attacks and feints to try to get within Jerome's defense. Unable to breach it, the Parvati grew frustrated at not being able to kill this upstart. Suddenly, pain erupted from his left outer thigh, and he was shocked to see blood welling from a shallow cut that Jerome had managed to land. The crowd gasped, utterly surprised that this man with knives against swords had managed to draw first blood, especially against the Parvati. James nudged Roland, who turned to see him with a smile on his face. He's good. I see that, Roland said, amazed. His pride wounded at not drawing first blood, the Parvati screamed and pressed the attack, trying to connect less by skill than by brute strength. This new series of blows left Jerome's arms fatigued from having to take more of the force of the blows on his knives rather than deflecting it away. Deciding to change tactics, Jerome went on the offensive, startling the Parvati, who was not used to such a maneuver from an opponent. With amazing agility, Jerome managed to get within his guard and scored another slash across his chest. Not deep, but it was a staggering blow to the Parvati's ego. Jerome took a few steps back to catch his breath as he watched to see what the Parvati would do next. The Parvati stared at the blood coming from his chest and then looked over to Jerome. His eyes turned red and flecks of foam appeared at the edge of his mouth. Berserker! Jerome recognized the signs from others he had faced in the pits. Berserkers were incredibly dangerous, but often left themselves open for counterattacks, providing their opponent lived that long. With a cry unlike any he had uttered thus far, the Parvati raced forward, swords flying with incredible speed. Jerome's knives deflected blow after blow, his arms deadening from the impact of a berserker's strength. Then the moment came that he'd been waiting for. A series of attacks that, when properly dealt with, would bring the long sword just into just the right position. He caught the long sword between his knives and twisted while at the same time jerking the blade to the side. To the amazement of the onlookers, the Parvati's longsword flew out of his hands and sailed over the crowd. Onlookers dove out of the way as the sword struck, its point sinking a foot into the ground. Everyone looked in awe at the weapon standing upright a dozen feet from the combatants. The loss of his sword snapped the Parvati out of the berserker's rage, which greatly diminished his strength. All berserkers used up most of their stamina while in the rage. He staggered backwards, striking at the upper hand, staring at the empty hand, not understanding what had just happened. Taking the offensive, Jerome advanced, knives whirling in a pattern that a single sword was unable to defend against. Doing his best, the Parvati, who had been so sure of victory, was now just trying to survive. Cut after cut appeared open, cut after cut spraying open upon his body, arms, legs, and chest all welled blood. Greatly weakened by the berserker's rage, he was increasingly becoming unable to block Jerome's blows, until at last Jerome got within his defense and sliced him across the wrist, severing the tendons. Unable to hold the sword any longer, the Parvati watched it fall from his now useless hand to the ground. Without even pausing, Jerome moved in and finished him off with a stab to the chest, puncturing his heart. Pulling his blade, Jerome took a step back. To the shocked awe of the crowd, the Parvati crumbled to the ground, dead. Yeah, I like crumbled better than fell. Crumbled to the ground, dead. The crowd erupted in cheers and applause. Coming to him, James asked, "Are you tired? Or are you okay?" Nodding, Jerome said, "Just tired." He wiped his knives clean on the Parvati's shirt. Once his knives were sheathed, he took the Parvati's purse and walked to the auctioneer. Roland joined him before he reached the platform. The auctioneer said something, and Roland said, "She's yours, Jerome, free and clear." Jerome turned to Tersa as she came down the steps of the platform. They gave him a slave shift for her, and he put it on her. Giving her an apologetic look, he took the tether that had been placed around her neck and then led her out of the courtyard while the onlookers moved aside, clearing a path for them. Cheers and cries of adulation followed them. She tried to hug him once they were outside the stable compound, but he stopped her, saying, "Not here, not now." Understanding, she continued to play the part of slave until they reached the caravan. So that's chapter 14. He took down a Parvati. Now, that whole fight scene wasn't planned. The original plan was just to go in there, just bid for it, and bid for it, get her in, and just get out. That was my original plan. But as I was writing the auction, boom! What if someone challenged him? That would make it more interesting, right? So he did. Who knew that this scene that I just made up on the fly, had no plans for, I got no thought of what's going on in the future. At this point, okay, he's killed the Parvati and he's left. But now my brains are going, okay, now what's next? What's next? What's next? What's next? Right? What's the next logical course? Well, those of you who read the books, I didn't think about that at this point. It just gradually worked. And a lot of the stuff that seems like I have this grand plan, I really don't. I just make it up on the fly. Like the Parvatis, man. They didn't come into existence until I was typing chapter 14. Anyway, that's chapter 14. We'll do chapter 15 tomorrow, where he gets the pit fighters. Scar and Potbelly, and all the other, Shorty, right? Stig, and Stafford guy. Got a Q name? I can't for the life of me remember his name. But he gets them all. So, man, they get Tersa, he takes down a Parvati, and then the next chapter they get the pit fighters, who are instrumental through the entire thing. Oh, what a great book. Chapter 15 next. So, yeah, there was something I was going to talk about in the beginning. For the life of me, I can't remember what it was. Anyway, I do have a question for you guys. I mean, there's not many people here, and this is kind of a spoiler, a small spoiler. I mean, you might, about the current book I'm reading. Right. I need some information, and you guys have read the books. If you know the answer, message me. Don't put it in the comments. Just message me. Because most people don't watch all the way through, and when I'm done, they know, oh, well, Pratt's going to talk about his personal life, so we're going to just click off. So, okay. Blackhawk. Someone commented that he had a son. For the life of me, I can't remember the guy's name or anything. I've looked in several different places in the series, and I can't find it. So if you know where I mentioned Blackhawk's son, preferably if I mention him in Travail, message me with, hey, you can find him in this book, in this chapter. That's what I really need, because I can't find enough information of what I think is in there, and I want to make sure I'm consistent. Because, okay, fine, Blackhawk is coming back. He's going to get hip deep in this war, and and I mean, there's going to be this reveal, right? And Blackhawk is just going to be there. And unfortunately, if you guys have read this, that spoiled that for you guys, but maybe not. But anyway, if you can, if you know where Blackhawk's son is in my series, as many places as possible, let me know. I'd be happy. I'd be glad to know. If not, I'll figure something out. Okay, so that's chapter 15, and that's it. Oh no, that's chapter 14. 15 is tomorrow. I'm looking at chapter 15, so that's why I said 15. But no, chapter 14, and I'll do 15 tomorrow. Y'all take care.